this again. I keep telling you that a certain three-lettered company does not provide perfect internet service here in Boonville. So I was right in the middle of discussing the ketogenic lifestyle and science behind that, and I got kicked off. So I thought, well, maybe Mark Zuckerberg doesn't like what I'm saying, but because my router looked like it was on, but it wasn't. So to reiterate, rather than starting over from scratch, this is from a lecture that Dr. Eric Westman, hey Eileen, who practices basically obesity medicine or weight loss, I guess probably might be the best way to say it, improving lifestyle through ketogenic diets and ketogenic lifestyle. So he has learning classes. He's pretty in touch with the patients that he takes care of. 6-month waiting list to get to him. So lower limit, I was saying, lower limit of carbohydrate intakes that will sustain your life is 0. And we went through all of the calculations because your brain runs on glucose but can also run on ketones. And one of the goals of a ketogenic lifestyle is to be in ketosis, not the nasty one like ketoacidosis you're talking about with diabetics that get in trouble. This is ketosis, not ketoacidosis. That's a metabolic acidosis, which can be dangerous. But your body, so you run on ketosis, or ketones, your brain, and your body makes enough glucose on its own, either from breaking down glycogen that's stored glucose and fat, or you just endogenously within your body make glucose so that your actual oral intake really can be 0 and you're still alive and everything's working fine. So we talked about the Paleo and Mediterranean diet, which is getting into a low glycemic index diet, and the Atkins diet is truly low carbohydrate, high fat, from 1971, early 1970s, when Robert Atkins published the Atkins Diet Revolution. So the ketogenic diet, the science behind it. So what does one eat for ketogenesis? So how do you get into ketogenesis, or where you're spilling ketones in your urine? So they sell little test strips that you can urinate on, kind of like a pregnancy test, to tell you if you're spilling ketones, and that tells you if you're in ketosis. So you can eat all you want. So no calorie counting. You can eat all the meat, poultry, seafood, and whole eggs that you want. So this is a typical, I'll get to a typical day to achieve less than 20 grams of carbohydrates. So all you want of meat, poultry, seafood, and whole eggs. You gotta eat the yolk too. You limit the following to decrease insulin resistance or to eliminate type 2 diabetes. I've taught people how to do that for many years, 20. 10 years focused on really weight management and weight loss. So salad greens, 2 cups a day. So you're limiting that to 2 cups a day. And then vegetables, 1 cup measured of uncooked vegetables, and then you cook them however you want or eat them raw. You must eat vegetables every day if you're on a ketogenic lifestyle. Okay, not a lot, because you get all you want of meat, poultry, seafood, and whole eggs, right? And then cheese at 4 ounces a day. That was one of the things that Dr. Atkins, everybody thought he was a moron and an idiot because he would eat bacon and eggs and cheese and high-fat stuff, okay? But he wasn't obese, he didn't have a weight problem, and he didn't die of heart disease. He died of a cerebral hemorrhage after slipping on the ice and hitting his head on a sidewalk. And he was in his 70s. Okay, so a typical day of eating to get less than 20 grams of carbohydrates a day. So I'll just give you the rundown. For breakfast, you would eat bacon and eggs. Okay. For lunch, a chicken Caesar salad or a fast food burger with no bun. So the bun is where the carbohydrates that causes the fat or the weight gain comes from, is the bun. So a lot of people will just order a cheeseburger with no bun, and I don't know, I think McDonald's will do it. You just take the bun off and throw it away. Restaurants will do it for sure. I used to eat at a restaurant and bar named Louie's in Moore, Oklahoma, and they had a wonderful blue cheeseburger, and I would order it just as a blue cheeseburger, no bun, no French fries. Okay, and then for a snack, olives, cheese sticks, or pepperoni slices. Okay, so your lunch would be chicken Caesar salad. Now, this type of eating violates Dr. Jason Fung's way of doing this because he wants you to intermittently fast, so eat one meal a day or one meal every other day. Okay, so this is eating all through the whole day, and he thinks that spikes insulin response, which it probably does. Not as much because you're not eating as many carbs. So olives, cheese sticks, pepperoni slices for a snack. For dinner, a steak with blue cheese, broccoli, or salmon with cream sauce and broccoli. And then your drinks throughout the day would be water, coffee with cream, and a little salt for electrolytes. So a lot of people that do the intermittent fasting will drink coffee with cream and put some salt in it. And then if they're hungry during the day and they're fasting, bone broth is okay with the fasting method. Okay? And so you also take a daily multivitamin. So that way you're getting all your vitamins, even though you're not eating as much salad and greens and all that. Okay, so obesity is really a disease of fat, not weight. So the goal is losing fat, not really losing weight. But of course, if you've got a fair amount of peripheral body fat, if you lose it, you're probably going to lose weight. But if you're working out, muscle weighs more than fat. So I've helped an athletic woman, 165 pounds. I can't remember how old or how tall she was, but her BMI was actually a little high. Helped her lose weight, but she played semi-professional volleyball. So she didn't lose any weight. She still weighed 165 pounds, but her body shifted its form. So she lost her little love handles and this, that, and the other thing. She was just pure muscle once we got the fat to go away. So she burned all of her fat off. Okay. So the least amount of weight loss is on a low-fat diet. And this is from Dr. Westman. He's got scientific slides showing this. Comparing low-carb, high-fat diets, so the ketogenic diet, the paleo-Mediterranean diet, which is low glycemic index, and then the low-fat diet. The least amount of weight losses with low-fat diets, which is what the food pyramid has burned into your brain for the last 50 years. Okay, the second least amount of weight loss is paleo or the Mediterranean diet. And the best weight loss of fat is the low carbohydrate, high fat ketogenic diet. You will lose weight better eating that than you will low fat. Or even the plant-based and fish-based paleo Mediterranean diet. Okay, so what we're trying to, so that's the obesity part of this. You will lose weight the best. So what about metabolic syndrome, which is insulin resistance that over time can lead into a diagnosis of type 2 diabetes? Okay, and what about metabolic syndrome regarding cardiovascular disease? So we spent a lot of time talking about metabolic syndrome, type 2 diabetes, and insulin resistance leading to cardiovascular events when we did this 4-part series in May. So if you have metabolic syndrome, you have a 2 times higher risk of cardiovascular disease over the ensuing 5 to 10 years. So if you stay metabolically syndromed or insulin resistant, you will double your risk of heart disease. Okay, you have a quintuple risk of developing type 2 diabetes if you have insulin resistance. So by a factor of 5 higher. Okay. All right. So the metabolic syndrome definition has to do with higher blood pressure. So, and of course that changes all the time. 120 over 80 is kind of the deal, and hypertension is 140 over 90 or higher. So elevated blood pressure, abdominal obesity, so that gut stuff right in your midsection. Okay. And then insulin resistance with a fasting insulin level greater than 20. So you can measure that. It's a pretty simple little blood test. They make Life Extension, who I keep telling you guys is a great way to get your labs. Um, they have a great intake lab work thing for weight management. So does yourlabs.com. I've got 4 or 5 labs that are direct access that specifically do a lab panel for people that are embarking on weight loss patterns. Okay, so I said metabolic syndrome. So higher blood pressure, abdominal obesity, insulin resistance, which you can measure with an insulin level. Increased blood glucose. So diabetes is fasting blood sugar of 126 or higher. Insulin resistance is 100 to 125 fasting blood glucose level. And then atherogenic dyslipidemia, which we talked about in May. So he's specifically looking at elevated triglycerides, apolipoprotein B levels, LDL particles, not the number, particles. So there's a way to do an LDL particle, low density lipoprotein particle size. And I was kind of interested because he called it LDL cholesterol. Remember, LDL is not a cholesterol, it's a lipoprotein. It's a taxi for cholesterol, as is HDL. So people with metabolic syndrome have an HDL level that's usually less than 40. Okay, you put all that together, 5 times higher risk of diabetes type 2, 2 times higher risk of cardiovascular disease, 5 to 10 years down the road. Okay, so low-fat diets lower LDL levels, like low-density lipoprotein levels. Low carbohydrate, so that's their claim to fame. Low carbohydrate diets lower triglycerides and increased high-density lipoprotein levels. So it's a different mechanism of action. Low fat, lower LDL. High fat, lower triglycerides, higher HDL. Okay? So compared to a low fat diet, a very low carbohydrate diet does the following. It decreases body mass index, so obesity is defined at 30, overweight is defined at 27. Okay? With abdominal fat, so it decreases abdominal fat storage. It decreases triglycerides, increases HDL, decreases apolipoprotein B levels, that's a blood test, decreases serum glucose levels, decreases insulin, this is low carb diet, decreases leptin, and leptin is made in fat, and basically if you get your leptin levels right, your brain resets your body weight. So if your leptin levels tell your brain, okay, we weigh 155 pounds, or 170 pounds for a man, 135 pounds for a woman, you just do. That's what the beauty of leptin. Decreases liver fat, so low carb diets decreases liver fat, and decreases saturated fat synthesis, since more fat is being burned as fuel. So you don't need to synthesize fat, you're burning it. So the mini skinny shot and the super skinny shot both help you do that. Part of what they do is help you burn fat while you're going through this weight loss journey. Okay, so what about diabetes? So people that have diabetes already, so they may be insulin dependent, they may not be, they may be on glucophage, metformin, glyburide, whatever. I'm telling you, if you do this, you can get off those meds. You can certainly get off insulin for the most part, not everybody, because Dr. Westman is doing this for type 1 diabetics, and most doctors and the American Diabetes Association thinks that's not possible, that you can do a low-carb diet with type 1 diabetes, but you can. And remember, the ADA guidelines include lots of carbohydrates and snacks, etc., etc. So basically, you're giving people that are sugar intolerant sugar, and then wondering why they don't get better, or they don't lower their insulin levels. So I was taught in medical school, diabetes is a chronic, debilitating, ongoing, you can't fix it disease. Type 1 is genetic, possible, that's true, but type 2 diabetic can get off meds most of the time, not always. Okay, so if you don't believe me, about diabetics and diabetes and reversing type 2 diabetes. It goes all the way back to a published paper in the Journal of the American Medical Association in 1920. It was published by William Osler, Dr. Osler, who wrote a whole bunch of books. Most medical students have his bedside companion as a book where he did his little drawings in. So there's actually still the Osler Institute where they teach physicians how to get ready for their board exams. I've given lectures for the Osler Institute before. So JAMA, 1920, and then he wrote a book. And so there's Dr. Westman in his lecture put up a picture of the book that showed what Dr. Osler was preaching about for diabetics. No meds. They didn't have meds for diabetes in 1920. So he used the low carbohydrate, high fat ketogenic diet to treat diabetes, which is basically what Dr. Westman's doing as well. So the daily intake, interestingly, was this. Carbohydrates, 10 grams, so that's low carb. So that'd be 40 calories. Protein, 75 grams, which translates to 300 calories. Fat at 150 grams, so 1,350 calories of fat, and this is natural fat, okay? And then alcohol was in there at 15 grams, gives you 105 calories. So apparently, whiskey, scotch, not beer. I don't think he would go for beer, but it was ethyl alcohol. So that gives you 1,795 calories a day. So you're under 2,000. And so the alcohol part of it was based on the fact that the liver lowers glucose production if you are drinking alcohol or having some alcohol, because ethanol is converted to glucose, so your liver doesn't have to make any or decreases the amount that it does. Okay, so the cause, according to Dr. Osler, of type 2 diabetes as of 1920 was high glucose input with decreased clearance of glucose, which is still kind of the deal. And the American Diabetes Association dietary guidelines still have high glucose input. And you have to use meds and insulin to increase clearance of glucose. Okay? So treatment for weight loss, nutrition, so the carbohydrate nutrition decrease was or not decrease, sorry, the dietary intake that caused diabetes type 2 1920 was lots of carbs, a little bit of protein, and no fats. And then treatment led to weight loss in the abdominal fat region. And then there was a better exercise tolerance. However, exercise was not part of the deal. So most of the type 2 diabetics that I've counseled as a health coach and a physician, they're not exercising. My 310-pound, 80-year-old guy that I put on testosterone and taught him how to eat ketogenically came off of his insulin within probably 6 to 8 weeks. His doctor was mad at me because I put him on testosterone. But he needed it, and it got him to where he was walking and he could walk on a treadmill, and he was having sex with his wife for the first time in 15 years, all within about 6 to 8 weeks. Okay? And he wasn't really exercising a lot. He had some sex and he walked on a treadmill. When I first met him, he could barely walk. I had to walk him. He had to hold on to me to sit him on my couch. Okay, so calories matter. Okay, but more important is where the calories come from. So Dr. Fung doesn't believe that. If you're doing intermittent fasting, it doesn't matter what calories you eat, how many calories you eat. He tells you don't count calories, just eat. And you eat until you're full. It takes 20 minutes for your gut to tell your brain that you're full, so you have to slow down. So you just take 30 minutes eating your dinner, and you will just naturally know when to stop eating. Pretty simple. Okay, Dr. Westman, of course, did a study. Okay, so low carbohydrate ketogenic diet lowers hemoglobin A1C by 1.5% over 24 weeks, so not even a half a year, just shy of a half of a year. You get lowered hemoglobin A1C, so diabetics have a A1C of 6.5 or higher. Insulin resistant people have a hemoglobin A1C of 5.7 to 6.4%. Okay, a low glycemic index diet, so he's comparing low carb ketogenic with low glycemic like paleo or Mediterranean or complex carbohydrates, lowers hemoglobin A1C by 0.5% compared to ketogenic. That was over 24 weeks at Dr. Westman's office. Okay, so here's some clinical vignettes that he talked about. So 64-year-old male, BMI, body mass index 29.1, so he was just shy of obese. New onset diabetes with a hemoglobin A1C of 10.5%. Referred to Dr. Westman by an endocrinologist who was fixing to put this guy on insulin. He met all the criteria for putting him on insulin. He started a low carbohydrate ketogenic diet in August. In October, he had lost 30 pounds, and his A1C went from 10.1%, which if you stay that high, you're probably going to die, down to 5.5%. No meds, no medications, no glucose lowering pills, no insulin. He just did it with a low carb, high fat diet with Dr. Westman. Okay, 64 years old. So he was type 2 diabetic, would have been insulin dependent in 2 months, August, October. His hemoglobin A1C was normal. He did not have diabetes type 2 anymore. Second patient I'll tell you about, in April, weighed 302.5 pounds, started a low carbohydrate ketogenic diet with teaching classes. So Dr. Westman goes on Zoom or whatever he does, and he teaches class for anybody that's in his clinic, kind of like what I'm doing. And he just teaches this dietary way of eating and the way of living. So by January, so April to January, weight loss from 302 to 258 pounds. Okay. Hemoglobin A1C was at 5.9%. He didn't say what it started at. HDL went from 44 to 67, so elevated, good. And then triglycerides dropped from 101 to 59. Okay, so remember we talked about low carb, high fat diets lower triglycerides and raise HDL levels. Low fat diets lower LDL levels. They're not cholesterol, they're taxis, remember? Okay, then he has a patient who's on insulin at 100 units per day. So an insulin dependent type 2 diabetic. And so he decreases the dose. Anybody on insulin, he drops the dose of insulin by 50% immediately. As soon as they start this low carbohydrate diet, the insulin dose is cut in half the same day. If the fasting blood sugar is less than 100 or postprandial blood sugar is normal, no insulin is given. So at the time that they're supposed to give insulin, they do a finger stick blood sugar. If it's less than 100, no insulin. Okay. They're checking blood sugars about 2 to 3 times per day. That patient went off 100 units of insulin in 6 weeks. So 100 units a day, dropped to 50 on day 1 of the low carbohydrate diet, off insulin 6 weeks later. Another patient, 28-pound weight loss over 6 weeks, was on insulin 80 units per day, off in 1 week. That's how fast you can reverse sugar intolerance and insulin resistance with this diet. So you cannot fix insulin resistance by giving more insulin. That's what endocrinologists do, diabetologists do, that's what the ADA preaches, American Diabetes Association. You have to reduce immediately the insulin dose if you start a low carb diet. Okay? So the ADA diet really is counterproductive for a diabetic. You're giving a person who's sugar intolerant sugar, and then you have to just keep raising the insulin dose. Okay, so the ADA, I keep saying this, they recommend 45 grams of carbohydrates per meal. So if you're eating 3 meals a day and snacks, you're way over that 150 gram, what would be considered the higher level of low carbohydrate intake. So the amount of glucose in your blood at any one time, if you could measure all the glucose in your blood at any one time, it's usually about 7 grams, which is 1 tablespoon of sugar. That's it. That's all you got running around in your bloodstream. That's all you need. The rest of it's stored in fat as glycogen. So if you're eating more carbohydrates than you need, and remember you only need 0, then you're going to store that as fat. So even patients who've had bariatric surgery, and I'm sure you know some people that had bariatric surgery and then they lost a bunch of weight and then they started gaining weight again. So they might have bands or part of their muscle, part of their stomach, gastrectomies, all kinds of stuff. They'll figure out, if they're eating carbs, they're gonna gain weight again. So if they're not taught this way of eating after bariatric surgery, they just spent however many thousands of dollars to have bariatric surgery, and if they're not taught a low carb ketogenic way of eating, they'll figure out a way to gain weight, and the body will. Now here's another patient, 70-year-old African American female from Dr. Westman, diabetes, diagnosed 1998, went on a 2-year low carbohydrate ketogenic diet. Her diagnoses were diabetes, hypertension, GERD, so reflux esophagitis. She was she was on an American Diabetic Association diet, and she was doing finger stick blood sugars about 4 times a day. Okay, so after 2 years on low carb ketogenic diet, she came off all of her medications. So she was on medications for diabetes, she was on blood pressure pills, and she was on insulin. So her meds were discontinued, her blood pressure normalized, so did her blood sugar. She came off of her reflux esophagitis meds, her blood pressure meds, and her insulin all. So her weight loss was 220 pounds down to 170 pounds. Her hemoglobin A1C dropped from 7.4% to 5.4%. So, in summary, there's the science. So we're at 26 minutes plus the 5 or 6 minutes I did earlier. Low carbohydrate ketogenic diets reduce hunger with a spontaneous reduction in caloric intake, and thus you lose fat and presumably weight, although if you're building muscle you may not lose weight. You're going to lose fat and your clothes are going to fit different. That's a better marker, okay, than weighing yourself. And then I'm going to tell you probably later this week about a smart scale that I found. That's kind of cool. But it kind of helps with motivation if you can see the weight loss. Okay. So low carbohydrate ketogenic diet helps with obesity, metabolic syndrome or insulin resistance, and type 1 and type 2 diabetes. He's even treated people with heart failure. He's treated people that were on ventricular pumps awaiting heart transplant, autoimmune disease, chronic disease, really of any kind, will be helped and potentially cured. Not everything's cured by low carbohydrate ketogenic diet, but a lot of that chronic stuff is. Okay, so there's promising research going on, more research all the time on intervening on chronic illness and the effect of low carbohydrate ketogenic diet on the onset of stroke and heart attacks. So that is the science behind the ketogenic diet. Okay, what I do is counsel you on that. So people, I hear from people all the time that are in the middle of that. If they want some energy with shot support, they're taking mini skinny shots once a week, or they're taking the super skinny shot twice a week, as well as doing low carbohydrate ketogenic high fat diet lifestyle, and the weight will come off. Okay, and all of your parameters will be better. And if you're a type 2 diabetic, you'll get off meds fairly quick. So the rest of the week, I think we're going to stay on ketogenics for the rest of the week, a little bit more applicable stuff instead of just science coming up. And I'll see you Wednesday morning at 9:30, unless I get called to substitute teach at the high school, and then I'll do it later after school. So have a great day. It's wonderful. It feels like fall. It's nice and sunny and pretty reasonable temperature outside. So you all have a great Monday and Tuesday. I'll see you Wednesday. Peace and health to you all. See you later. Bye-bye. I'm glad we got through this finally. See ya. Bye.